Hi everyone, and welcome to Compliance Panel's live webinar, and I'm David, your host for today. On behalf of Compliance Panel team, I would like to thank you for being part of this event. Now, the topic for today's presentation is the CAPA primer, elements of a CAPA program and uses of CAPA data. Today's presenter is Mr. Jeff Kissoff. Jeff has been involved in regulatory affairs and quality assurance for more than 20 years. And over that time, Jeff has implemented CAPA programs and overseen their operations. His involvement in CAPA systems has also included direct interaction with FDA personnel during inspection, so he's well aware of their practices and expectations. And Jeff has achieved his regulatory affairs certification in 1996. We're really honored to have someone as distinguished as Jeff with us presenting this webinar. Before we begin, I would like to inform you of the program outlined for today's webinar. The webinar is for 60 minutes duration. First, Jeff will take you through today's presentation. Today's webinar, highlighting the areas that would be covered, and he will then share with you his presentation. Now, for the purpose of avoiding discontinuity, we request all to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. Now, if for any reason you get logged out of the training session or teleconference, please follow the same procedure to join in again. Now that we're all ready to start, I request Jeff to take it from here. Jeff?
Thanks very much for the introduction, David. Let me welcome everybody first to the webinar. I realize it's not much of a welcome because you're there and I'm here. For those of you who have not attended webinars, I think you'll find that the benefits far outweigh the detriments. The only detriment I can think of is I can't see you, you can't see me. What I do to try to ameliorate that is I try to run my Q&A session at the end as far as more of a face-to-face, more of a give-and-take kind of thing, as opposed to you ask me a question and then we're done discussing it. The thing about corrective and preventive action is it's more than just fixing things. People who are not in compliance or QA, people who are more production-based, tend to think of corrective action as, this item is broken, I'm going to fix it. If another item is broken, I'm going to fix that too. I'm correcting it, that's not a problem. Correction and corrective action are two different things. And my goal today is to explain to you what the requirements are for corrective action and what you need to do to have an effective corrective action program, as well as what you use your CAPA data for. The outline of this presentation is I'm going to start with a review of the regulations. I'm going to start with Food and Drug Administration, spend a bit of time on the Medical Device Directive. I'm going to follow that up with, after the regulations are there, we're going to talk about the sequence, all the elements of a CAPA program and how they fit together sequentially. Common FDA citations is not in this presentation. I've decided to remove that in lieu of focusing more on what the requirements are. In my experience, it's less important to know what others have done, but much more important to know what your firm needs to do. I'm going to follow that up with a sample investigation record that I've used for many years in the past. It's undergone FDA scrutiny, notified body scrutiny from notified body with regard to our European community, and it documents everything. It ties your investigation up into a really nice, tidy bow, which is what you want it to be. And then we'll end with a summary. So, moving on straight ahead. FDA 21 CFR 820.100 is the section for corrective and preventive action. And what it requires is that you have a procedure or procedures for corrective and preventive action. The difference here between corrective and preventive action is a relatively significant one. Corrective action is in response to a negative finding, an isolated negative finding, or a negative trend of quality data. Corrective action can either be product or process specific. It can be that your process needs to be fixed, or it can be that a particular product needs to be redesigned. Those are both acceptable types of corrective action. Preventive action, as you'll see, takes corrective action and moves it a step forward. You're preventing possible nonconformances as opposed to correcting existing nonconformances. 820.100A gives you a list of what needs to be in your CAPA procedure or procedures. You use the S here in parentheses because I find it important to explain to attendees at my seminars and webinars that it is not required that you have one procedure that includes all of your CAPA in it. CAPA can originate from many different areas, and specifically in the regulation here, it lists quite a few of those areas. What I've done in the past is my quality manual talks about my CAPA practices very generally, that we implement CAPA programs, but what it does is it pulls together the procedures that, in response to which CAPA can be introduced. For example, my complaint handling procedure, my in-process quality data analysis procedure, my service procedure, design control, things like that. So I do have multiple procedures, and I reference them in the quality manual. What I'm trying to point out here is there are two ways of meeting this requirement, and neither way is right. More importantly, neither way is wrong. In this regulation, the FDA is kind enough to give you an extensive list of areas from which your CAPAs will originate. Process and work operations, that's in-process or production-type operations. Concessions, something that many people often forget or more often overlook with regard to doing corrective and preventive action, is concessions. Use as is. There are going to be, and there are many times where you have a component or a yield from a process that does not meet your specification. However, the area of the specification that is not met is, for example, cosmetic. Let's say that you have a piece of hardware that is supposed to be powder blue, but it's navy blue instead. That's, from an efficacy perspective, that is completely acceptable to use. From a sales perspective, it may not be. Sales has implemented this requirement because they want the light blue or the powder blue to match all of your company's other products. However, this one has been made by production, or you've received it from an outside outsourcing firm, and the need for it is great. This customer has a need that needs to be met and needs to be shipped today. This piece comes in and it's off color. You're going to make a concession to use that non-conforming product. Concessions are an area that need to be trended from a corrective action perspective. Quality audit reports, both singularly and trend-wise. If you have a quality audit, either internal or external finding, you're going to either require your firm, your production manager or service area, to respond with what their corrective action plan is. Also, a supplier, same type of thing. Quality records, if you're evaluating, that's more trend-based. Service records as well, either isolated or trend-based. Complaints and return product, the most critical, in my opinion, of all of these. That's product that actually has hit the field, as is service records, but service records are more perceived as it just happens. Our product needs servicing, go ahead and send it in. But a complaint, somebody has a real problem with your product. Complaints should be CAPA'd, if you will, on a complaint-by-complaint basis. Each complaint should be analyzed to determine what type of investigation is required and what type of corrective action is required. Continuing the contents of procedure, you'll see here that the previous slide and this slide both are numbered with 1. Section 1 of the reg sets forth both the really helpful list from the previous slide, but also tells you the extent of your identification, if you will. You're required to identify existing and potential causes of a non-conforming product. Existing causes, it's easy to identify. They're there. The existing causes are those that are present, that exist. When it comes to potential causes, what I advise people to do is look at the very valuable preamble to the quality system regulation. If you have never read it and you're in compliance or QA or even production, it's something you need to read. It's not very long, well, from my perspective, because I read regulations for a living, but it's very valuable because it presents the intent of the generators of the regulation. Good example is with regard to what the heck are potential causes, and I'm going to read, I usually don't do this in my presentation, have taken out certain areas. The preamble states that it is essential that the manufacturer establish procedures for implementing CAPA. These procedures must provide for control and action to be taken on devices distributed and those not yet distributed that are suspected of having potential nonconformities. This underlined section has the word potential in it. It's the only reference to potential nonconformity in the preamble. And my interpretation of the reg is that's what is meant by identifying potential causes. Product that has not yet been distributed that could have the same type of nonconformance. For example, if you produce long product line of catheters and you have a complaint on one of the catheters, part of your CAPA investigation needs to be to look at your entire line of catheters, 7 French, 8 French, all the way to 12 French if you have them, and see whether the same investigation is applicable and therefore the same corrective action would need to be implemented for the rest of the product line of catheters. Your procedure also the reg also requires that your procedure have you investigate the cause of nonconformities related to product, process, and the quality system. Immediate cause and root cause. And I'll mention this again, we'll review this a little more in the presentation with an example or two. Immediate cause is what caused your nonconformance, the proximal, if you will, cause of your nonconformance. The root cause is the underlying cause of the nonconformance. In essence, what caused the immediate cause. And like I said, I have a couple of examples later on that will bring this a little more into clarification. It's interesting that the regulation talks about requiring you to investigate the cause of nonconformities relating to the quality system. There are going to be things that don't have immediate causes and root causes. An example that comes to my right away is training. If your quality system, if the training system, if you will, and your quality system has enough nonconformities in it, you're going to be required to evaluate that and perform a CAPA on that. The procedure also requires you to identify the actions needed to correct and prevent recurrence of nonconformities. Investigation logically concludes with action. I like to state that during my presentation. And the question here is, how does the investigation that you've done show that the action that you're going to implement is the correct or logical one? By verification or validation. Unlike sections that deliberately include reference to quality system and other quality problems, things like that, item 4 here is, the application of item 4 is limited to devices because you're required here to verify or validate, up to you, your CAPA, the actions you're going to take to make sure that these actions are effective and do not adversely affect the finished device. If it's effective, it eliminates the nonconformance. Pretty straightforward there. When it comes to adversely affecting your finished device, your responsibility is to make sure that having implemented this new action, having implemented this new design or new process, that the device that is affected, or devices, because it could be preventive action, still continue to function as per their indications. This is often applicable to software-driven devices or manufacturing processes. For example, bug fixes shouldn't step on the rest of the operating system. When you implement a bug fix, you're going to make sure that full software operational capability is checked as part of the validation for each of your bug fixes. It's very, very important. Your procedure also you must also implement and record document changes that are needed to correct or prevent identified quality problems. This is the relationship between CAPA and document control. Your CAPA procedure, or again, procedures, must explicitly include or reference your document control procedure. I recommend that the latter, that you just reference it, since your document control procedure is going to be the same whether the document change initiates in CAPA or elsewhere. There's no need to repeat the process in your CAPA procedures. You can meet this requirement as simply as stating something like, document changes resulting from corrective or preventive actions are implemented per SOP 123, our document control procedure. When you want to be careful here that when you change a document as a result of CAPA, that document that is changed is processed per your normal document control procedures. The next section you're required to ensure that information related to quality problems of non-conforming product is disseminated to those responsible for assuring product quality or preventing the problems. What this means is that when you change a document, that's the information, that your documents are distributed and that training is performed. So the fact that you've changed the document and subjected it to ECO, engineering change order, or ECO or DCO control, whichever, that's not enough. You need to make sure that those documents that are changed are distributed and that training is performed. CAPA at this point has morphed from being solely CAPA to implementing your standard document control processes. However, the section of the FDA regs still reference this as a requirement for CAPA. And lastly, you're responsible, you must submit relevant information on identified quality problems, including CAPA, for management review. So now CAPA has not just touched itself, the CAPA system, it has gone to document control, it has gone to training, and now it's going to management review, management control management review. And on your management review procedure must reference your CAPA procedure. It must state that all CAPAs will be reviewed by management for efficacy and adequacy, and also it must appear on your minutes. Now remember that your management review, the results of your management reviews are not viewable by FDA. So it's incumbent upon you to make sure that you have a summary document that is reviewable by the FDA that shows that during your management review, you reviewed your CAPAs and which CAPAs those were. A summary document or an agenda or minutes. Something like that usually suffices as far as the FDA is concerned. There's a section of 82100 which seems so overwhelming and so much that it seems like something that you can't do without a degree in statistics. You're required to employ appropriate statistical methodology to detect your quality problems. You can't just look at quality problems and have a gut instinct. You need to do data analysis. Data analysis is a type of statistical methodology. Trending is a type of statistical methodology. Here's a good word for you, a histogram. I throw that word around a lot in my training sessions and also in my internal documentation. A histogram is a bar graph. We use them all the time. That's the most effective way to trend, is using a bar graph. So if you trend, you do employ appropriate statistical methodology, so it's nothing to be intimidated by. Switching gears now from domestically here in the U.S. to internationally, the ISO standard. ISO 1345 is both more and less prescriptive than FDA's QSR regs. It includes significantly less and shorter requirements, but it does include a significant explanatory section on preventive action. However, this should not be taken to suggest that there is really much of a substantive difference between the requirements contained in the two. What I thought I'd do here, what I'd like to do here, is to illustrate the virtually identical nature of the QSR and ISO 1345. What I want to do, my goal here, is to show you that if you meet the requirements of one, you've also pretty much met the requirements of the other. Having said that, though, what I always tell attendees at my presentations is that in situations where the two contain the same requirements, specifically here and generally, it's the FDA regs that you want to design a regulatory compliance system to meet or audit your already established system to. And the reason why has to do with the relationship between your company and the enforcing entity. Those of you who have undergone an audit by your notified body for compliance with ISO standards realize that the positivity of the working relationship here, that in my experience with multiple notified bodies, they are willing to work with you. They have suggestions, they have ideas, they look at something and they say, this will work, but have you considered doing it this way? It's the exact opposite with the FDA. The FDA will not they will not suggest, they will not offer any positive or negative suggestions. The best way to look at this would be that an example that comes from my experience is that several years ago we were looking at not implementing a digital signature system, but taking our hard copy documents that were hand signed, scanning them and using those as the distributed originals. So we would keep the originals, but for distribution purposes, we would send copies of the scanned originals to all the work centers. Distribution is much easier that way. During an FDA inspection, we said to the inspector, what would you think about if we did it this way? Would this be in compliance? And her response was, I'm unable to comment on that. That's just a good example for you as far as the distinction and why I tell you to design systems around FDA compliance as opposed to ISO 1345. Just a little non sequitur there. 852 of ISO 1345 tells you to take action to eliminate the cause of nonconformities in order to prevent recurrence. This is the first section of 100 Section A. Says that corrective actions should be appropriate to the effects of the nonconformities encountered. It's 100A4. A4 does reference the requirement that the action be validated and be effective in eliminating the nonconformity and not adversely affect the device. 1345 uses one word, appropriate, to accommodate all these. And this is another reason why I encourage people to lean towards the FDA regulations. It's easier to know what the requirement is when you have to have your actions validated, that they have to eliminate the nonconformity, and they can't adversely affect your device. Those are three things. You can digest those easily. The word appropriate is completely open to interpretation until, of course, your notified body comes in, does a notified body audit, and cites you for non-appropriateness. Anyway, your corrective action procedure has to review nonconformities, and it specifically says in 1345, including customer complaints, as if that would be something we would avoid. That's 100A1, the first section, and you're required to determine the causes of the nonconformities. That's 100A1, the second part, and A2. The other sections here, C tells you to evaluate the need for action to make sure that nonconformities don't occur again, and that's 100A2. Determine and implement the action needed, including updating documentation, if appropriate. I've never understood why in a situation in which it would not be appropriate. However, that's 100A3 and 5. Record the results of your investigation and what you're going to do about it. That's A2 and 3. And review corrective action taken and its effectiveness. And that means effectiveness as far as how it removes the nonconformity. 853. Here's the section that I mentioned as far as where the ISO reg is more and is less. Here's where it's much more. There's an entire section here of preventive action. However, what you'll see when you look through it is that this is really no more than a regurgitation of the requirements for corrective action, as in the previous section of 1345. I used to ask myself why the drafters made it a point to include this. Why couldn't they just title 852 Corrective and Preventive Action? I believe the reason they did this is intent. They want to make sure that you identify corrective actions and preventive actions and distinguish one from the other. Note that in the FDA regs, while both corrective and preventive action are included, they are not separately referenced. You want to make sure, if you need to be in compliance with 1345, that when you identify and then perform preventive action, to explicitly reference it as such. In my experience, it's not the FDA that asks for this. They honestly don't care, but the notified body wants to see what type of preventive actions have you performed. And I've been asked that question during a notified body inspection and told them, we do preventive actions. I don't have a list of preventive actions. But that just goes to show that that's something they're interested in reviewing. Now that we've finished reviewing the requirements, what I'm presenting here for you is how CAPA is implemented, how each of the elements are incorporated into your quality system in a sequential manner. For the purposes of this presentation, I've grouped corrective and preventive action together. Well, the first element of a CAPA program is, of course, identifying the sources of nonconformances from which investigations and then your corrective or preventive actions can occur. This is the list that I use. What you'll see here is that some areas are trend-based, and I have put the word trend in them after parentheses. Some are more isolated-based. In other words, starting from the top, incoming inspection of components, we tend to do CAPA from an item-by-item basis, or at least we review it. If an off-the-shelf component comes in and it's not a critical component, not that that definition is underscored by the FDA anymore. When I say critical, I mean important. It's an off-the-shelf item. It's just a connector that we use. It's just a piece of tubing that we use. If we receive a nonconformance, we will not necessarily perform an investigation and a corrective action. That items like that, well, all incoming items are looked at from an ongoing supplier nonconformance area. However, if a critical, maybe a blood contact device, comes in nonconforming for a critical, again, very highly important nonconformance, we will issue a corrective action request to our supplier based on that. So from an incoming perspective, there's just single items as are evaluated as are trend of all nonconformances. Supplier audits. Anytime we do a supplier audit, I wholeheartedly encourage you to issue a report and request a corrective action plan. And you don't just want to when I say corrective action plan, and I'll use that during this section of the presentation, what I mean is you need internally or externally to know what the cause of the nonconformance was. Determining the cause of a nonconformance is as critical a part of your CAPA program as the actual action itself. If you don't know what caused the nonconformance, how can you possibly confirm beyond a reasonable doubt how effective the corrective action is going to be in fixing that problem? In process faulty components, there are going to be many times where if you make a large quantity of consumables or instruments, your company is more instrument-based, and you make PC boards, and you have thousands and thousands of resistors and capacitors and diodes, that you don't need to look at those on an item-by-item basis. However, as part of your quality review board or trending committee or something like that, you do want to look at all of your faulty components from a trend perspective. Annually is not going to give you enough visibility. It's not going to let you implement your corrective action quickly enough. Monthly is good. In my experience, monthly is a little too often because by the time you finish your investigation, you're evaluating again. Quarterly seems to tread the line nicely when it comes to frequency of trending. Also, in process human errors, very important here because you need to know which employees are assembling your products incorrectly and therefore correctly, to both reward those whose quality has met or ideally exceeded your quality baselines, and also to provide, to perform an investigation into why particular employees are not assembling your products correctly. It could be the employee has not been trained. It could be that the procedure that's in a situation where you have one employee making errors. If multiple employees are making errors, perhaps your procedure is not as clear as it should be. Final test in QA is products that are being inspected and or tested immediately before shipment to customer. That's critical because that's your last line of defense against complaints, and you want to trend that. Complaints, MDRs, very critical. I recommend complaints and MDRs both be investigated on a complaint-by-complaint basis. When I say that, it's certainly acceptable that you require that a particular complaint not have investigation required due to the fact that it's the same exact complaint that you had last month and you have already performed your investigation and you know what your corrective action is. Service requests, from an isolated perspective, should be evaluated for investigation and possible CAPA, depending on how important the service problem is, and they should be trended also to look at it from a more of a global perspective. Internal audit results and external audit results should both require CAPA investigation in CAPA, excuse me, on an isolated occurrence, because there are system nonconformances that were determined as part of an isolated review. Internal audits and external audits are both sample reviews. If you have not investigated, for example, if FDA determines a problem with your complaint handling, they have not looked at all of your complaints. They've looked at a statistical sample based on their quality system inspection technique, and they've found some nonconformances. Part of your investigation in that particular case would be to look at all of your complaints, and then if you determine something, what type of action you're going to perform. Then after you've identified that you need to perform an investigation, the investigation is obviously going to be performed. The assignment must be documented. It must be documented by whom, who is assigning the investigation, and make sure your procedures talks about where that's documented. If it's a complaint, it might be documented in your complaint committee. If it's something else, it might be documented in your quality review board or material review board or something to that effect. I like to use, when it comes to investigations, I like to use DOE, Design Investigations. And what that entails is you document your plan before you actually do it. What am I going to investigate on this nonconformance or this trend of nonconformances before I actually do it? And include contingencies if applicable. For example, if you have a complaint and the customer claims that they're going to return a product, we all know that there are times where the product is not returned, which is why, as part of your design investigation of this complaint, you'd want to have something like test return product per test procedure ABC. If product is not returned, review device history record and complaint to determine lot consistencies, and complaint records to determine whether there's a trend. That's what I mean by contingency here. When it comes to findings, include all of your data in your investigation, even to the rawest level. Also, having said that, also include a summary of your data. This is going to be more for the FDA or your notified body than it is for any other purpose. What I found in my years of experience is that if I'm performing an investigation, I am so intimately involved in it with it when I perform it, I know exactly what all this data means. But 2.5 years later, when the FDA comes, I don't remember what I did, or even worse, I'm not at the particular company anymore. Someone else has to explain what I did. A data summary is a one-sheet or ideally even shorter summary, of course it is, which explains what the results of your data was and talks about their significance. Continuing identification of cause. Your conclusion in your identification of cause, once you have your findings, you're going to have your conclusion. And here's where immediate cause and root cause become very, very critical. As I said before, the immediate cause is what caused the reported nonconformance. And the root cause is what the underlying cause of the nonconformance is. Here's two examples that might shine a little light on this. Example one would be an in-process trend. The nonconformance upon which investigation is required is an unacceptable rate of assembly errors. So the assembly errors in this particular work center were at 11% for this quarter. That's unacceptably high. So the production manager or quality engineer, whoever you would assign this to, is assigned the investigation. And he or she determines that the immediate cause is that operator number 165 committed too many assembly errors this quarter. That of that 11%, 9% was operator number 165. Well, that's great. That's not a conclusion, though. That's not a final conclusion specifically. That immediate cause needs to be further investigated to determine a root cause. And as part of the root cause investigation, this hypothetical situation, they could end up being that employee number 165 was not trained on the assembly procedure that he or she was doing. Certainly not beyond the realm of possibility. Another root cause could be that that the assembly that employee number 165 hasn't been there long enough, or should have been still under the on-the-job training, but they weren't. They weren't. So that's another situation. The second example, as opposed to in process, is a field report, and as opposed to a trend, is a single occurrence. So you have a particular instrument upon which you receive a complaint that it's not working for a particular reason. The instrument is failing in the field. Well, either when the item is returned to your firm, or maybe troubleshooting with one of your service people out in the field, you determine that the PC board is not operating correctly. Again, just as with the immediate cause previously, that is not a final conclusion. The final conclusion here is that the particular capacitor was faulty, that the reason that PC board was working was because of that particular capacitor. That's your root cause. As you can see in the root causes versus immediate causes, they are the causes of the immediate cause, and that enables you to implement a much more robust, much more applicable corrective action. Continuing the CAPA elements, after your investigation now that your investigation is completed, it's going to be reviewed. You want to have an interdepartmental committee review this investigation. Whoever's doing investigation is doing it from one particular angle. If it's the QE, if it's a quality engineer, they're more in quality, if it's in the quality mindset, if you will. If it's production or if it's service, that's their mindset. You want to have a review board review all of the investigations. They're going to review the investigation to take a look at the conclusions to make sure that they agree with them, but also to determine the corrective action. You certainly want to have your investigator recommend a corrective action, but you don't want the investigator to conclude that that is the corrective action that he or she is going to do, and even worse, they've done it already, because this is much better concluded interdepartmentally. It's always going to be based on the results of the investigation, but the more eyes that see it, the better, kind of thing. When your committee determines the corrective action, they're also going to look at, is there an opportunity here for preventive action? And what they're going to consider is the application of the corrective action to similar models or other employees or something to that effect. And after the investigation has been reviewed and the corrective action has been determined, and whether there needs to be preventive action has been determined, the corrective action is going to be performed. Again, as I mentioned previously, the corrective action has to be planned before it's performed with contingencies if necessary. And you need to set forth what your validation or verification requirements are with regard to the corrective action. What requirements need to be met, how many products you're going to use for the validation. Verifying your corrective action on one product is insufficient. You need to have your corrective action plan needs to talk about how many products you're going to do, what you're going to do, and how many products you're going to test this new recommended process or design on. The excuse me. The last two CAPA elements are implementation of corrective action. And so now that you know that your corrective action is going to work, is going to fix the problem, that is, you need to change whatever drawings or procedures that you need to change. And this is where your document control system comes in, because the implementation of corrective action is submitting the appropriate document change request to document control, along with any possible red line documents if you have that type of system. And then document control needs to submit an engineering change order and distribute the documents. So there's document control implications when it comes to implementation of CAPA. Once everything is done, the procedures are out there, people have been retrained, everything's ready to go, you have one last responsibility with regard to your CAPA. And what you're required to do is verify the effectiveness of your CAPA. And you need to verify it. The way you verify effectiveness is over a period of time. An idea that something that I've implemented for quite a while now is that in each of our quarterly quality review board meetings, we take a look at recently implemented corrective actions for the past quarter with regard to in process or field reports, whichever is applicable. And we say that for the first quarter, there were 9 complaints, for example, on products made before this corrective action was implemented, but 0 products made after the corrective action was implemented. And once we have 4 quarters of no complaints, field reports that is, alleging the same nonconformance, we consider that corrective action effective. What I want to show here, what I promised here, is this is an investigation record that I've used for quite a bit of time now. And the fancy title is Product Nonconformance Investigation Report, although its use has been expanded for in process or product or process nonconformance investigation report. And this is the document upon which we record all of our investigations and also all of our corrective actions. The first field is level, which is from where did this corrective action specify? Was it from the field? If so, what is the complaint, MDR, or recall number? Was it in process? If so, describe. Other, always got to include other, because you never know what, when you design a form or a system, there's always going to be something that you haven't anticipated. So we have the other form. I can tell you that at worst, I believe I can recall maybe 1 or 2 times in the last 12 months where that other box has been checked. So I guess it shows that we need to include that. After you've determined the origin of your nonconformance, little product part information, please. What's the description? What's the product or part? What's the lot or serial number? Was it from a particular work center or an employee? Any information you have with regard to the actual thing that was nonconforming. Then a summary of the nonconformance. If you have a complaint, feel free to edit copy the specifics of your complaint. If it's a trend, second quarter 2009 trend of PC board assembly. There's your summary of nonconformance. Too high. There's your summary of nonconformance. Now that you know what's wrong, what are you going to do? What's your plan for investigation? That's going to be recorded under your design of investigation. Again, plan for contingencies if possible. Now that you know what you're going to do, you've done it. What are your findings? What did you find as a result of your plan? Now that you know what you found, you have your conclusions. And again, we covered immediate cause, the distinction between immediate cause and root cause. Immediate cause is the proximal cause of the nonconformance, and the root cause is the underlying cause of the nonconformance. The investigator signs and dates this document, and this document is submitted to either the complaint committee, the quality review board, any committee that you might have that would look at investigations and review the investigations. To evidence review of the investigation, on the bottom of this form, it didn't really fit that well on the slide, but it is one complete document, is who reviewed this investigation. Was it the material review board, the quality review board, was the complaint committee? Hey, I don't have an other, I guess, but those are our only committees. And most importantly, what is the corrective action that's going to be included here? Corrective action, when it comes to recording here, corrective action can be closed, if you will, in one of 2 ways. I consider this investigation closed in a situation where the corrective action is going to be redesign of entire printed circuit board of device 123. Well, that's going to take a while. I don't want to have to leave this complaint investigation and corrective action open for the 4 months that it takes to close that investigation. I choose instead to surface detailed corrective actions like that onto one level up onto my quality review board or complaint committee meeting. So I can close this investigation based on the fact that another committee will be evaluating this the status of this corrective action on a routine basis. If it's a more localized corrective action, retraining employee 123. I'll hold this open until that's completed. So corrective action there would be retraining employee 123, see HR for training log, something to that effect, and you can close that. What I find is that having a consistent document for field reports, for in-process nonconformances, for all the nonconformances, makes it easier for your personnel who need to complete this document to understand what it is they need to need to write down. It also makes it easier for your inspectors, your external inspectors, to review your system and to show them that your CAPA system is consistent throughout. In summary, you're going to have a CAPA procedure, and your procedure's got to include, most importantly, requirements to assure that your corrective and preventive actions are implemented. How do you know that they're implemented? The requirements to assure that any changes that to correct or prevent quality problems are recorded, written down, documented. You want to have to make sure that your CAPAs are effective, that they work, so that's going to be validation, and that they do not adversely affect the finished device, and that's going to be your extended period evaluation. You want to make sure that your procedures and your systems both have a direct link between CAPA and change document control. CAPA is not complete until the documents are changed that evidence the actions in the CAPA. CAPA documentation must include root cause. The CAPA is not closed until your root cause, until the cause of the cause, if you will, is documented and completed. And any action you take, you've got to validate the action that you're going to take. I guess that's the end of the webinar here, so we can absolutely take questions. So David, why don't you go ahead and take that over?
Jeff, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And I also would like to thank all the participants for cooperating with us. It is now time for the Q&A to begin, and we request all participants to use the raise hand feature if they have any questions for a presenter, or post their questions in the Q&A panel. And if for any reason you're unable to ask your questions, doubts, please share it with me, your host, by chat, and I shall get the answer from a presenter. Meanwhile, we sincerely request you to share your feedback in the feedback form that will appear on your screen in the polling window. As I previously said, the raise hand feature is right below the participants panel. If you could just click on that, I'll unmute the line and you may ask a question, or you can post your questions in the Q&A panel, or send it to me by chat. And Jeff, I don't see any questions coming in. And may I unmute the participants one by one and ask them if they have any questions?
Absolutely.
Brent, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. I have no questions.
All right. And Joe, you have any questions for a presenter?
No, I don't have any questions. I did, excuse me, I did just want to find out if we were able to get a copy of the presentation.
I'll send it immediately after the session is over.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
And Lynn, do you have any questions?
No, no questions. Thanks.
Mr. David Hartman.
Yes, I do. This is Dave Hartman. I do have a question. I know nowhere in either the QSR or in ISO 1345 is a clean definition or even guidance on a universally accepted definition of closed as far as a corrective action event goes.
Right.
What's your experience on that?
That, the closure is what you define it as. Make sure that however your company defines closure with regard to corrective action, that it's in your CAPA procedure or procedures. And they will not have a problem with you either defining it as I've always defined it, which is my CAPA is closed when I've identified the corrective action that either has been taken or will be taken, or any other type of thing. So as long as you define it and stick to it, you'll be fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff. And I don't think there are any more questions. Jeff, for your permission, may I conclude the session?
Absolutely.
Attendees, we are very grateful for your participation in this webinar. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can send us an email at webinars@compliancepanel.com. And if any of you feel that your team members, colleagues, friends will benefit from this webinar, we were happy to inform you that it will be available in a recorded format and can be bought from our website, or you can call us at 714-441-5856. We welcome your suggestions and feedbacks or ideas on how we can improve our webinars. If you'd like to suggest a topic or desire a customized corporate training online or on-site, we ensure that whatever is a training necessity, it will be our priority. We look forward to having you with us again sometime soon and for your continued patronage. Thank you all once again and have a wonderful day.